Let's talk about the future of Ethereum. Hi there, it's Jackson. Thanks for watching and welcome back to another episode. I've been getting a few requests for this, so today I'm going to talk about Ethereum and its future. What does the roadmap look like for the next 1, 2, 3, or 5 years? But before we dive into that, if you do like these videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button below. And if you want to support their creation, go along to patreon.com/Jackson, where you can become a patron and get access to all sorts of exclusive perks, like early access to these videos. But the topic of the day is Ethereum, so let's dive right in. 2017, as most people know, was a massive year for Ethereum. It was the year that really put Ethereum on the map, not only because of its exponentially increasing price, but also just usage through smart contracts being leveraged for the ICO. But it's really only early days for Ethereum. ICOs and kind of digital assets still remain its one primary use case right now, and we haven't seen mainstream adoption just yet. But thanks to the prevalence of thousands and thousands of these ICO smart contracts and tokens that are operating on top of the Ethereum mainnet, the Ethereum network is now processing over 500,000 transactions per day. For comparison's sake, if you look at something like Bitcoin, it's currently only processing around 50,000 transactions per day on its network. So that's pretty crazy if you think about it. Ethereum is powering around 10 times the amount of transactions of the Bitcoin network. It's pretty busy. But as Ethereum started to grow, it wasn't without its growing pains. People started to see some slowdowns in the network, congestion, and increasing gas costs, making it cost upwards of $2 just to send a token to somebody. In parallel to this, concerns were being raised about its use of proof of work as a mining algorithm and how wasteful that is in terms of electricity as we face climate change. And lastly, the security of the whole protocol was just thrown into question, with a multitude of smart contract hacks occurring, resulting in the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars. So Ethereum has a long way to go, but they do have a roadmap to address some of these concerns, and that's what I'm going to cover today. Ethereum is interesting in comparison to something like Bitcoin Core in that the Ethereum team aren't shy about making huge changes to the underlying protocol if it means scalability or the addition of much needed features. As such, in the past, new releases of Ethereum have actually been hard forks of the entire network. There are 2 upcoming releases that will follow this same kind of pattern, the first being called Constantinople and the second being called Serenity. And some of the features or changes I'll be talking today will work their way into those releases, but we don't have a lot of clarity yet. That's still to be seen. So the first thing that a lot of people are talking about when it comes to the Ethereum roadmap is something called Casper. As I alluded to earlier, Ethereum relies on proof of work for consensus. This is exactly the same as Bitcoin in that you have a bunch of people with a lot of computing power pointing that computing power at the network, making it costly if they wanted to try and be a bad actor. But the Ethereum team, including Vitalik, the creator himself, is very aware of how wasteful proof of work is. Proof of work burns a lot of electricity because it's this constant arms race to get more electricity and more hardware trying to mine the stuff. And so from the very beginning, Vitalik and the team were very clear that at some point in the future, Ethereum would need to migrate to a proof of stake based system. Now I recommend you go back and watch my video about proof of work versus proof of stake. As I said in that video, proof of stake really hasn't been nailed in a way that doesn't introduce some severe points of centralization. And so to a certain degree, that's what drove the initial use of proof of work in Ethereum, is that proof of stake just wasn't there yet. Casper is simply the name of Ethereum's approach to solving the proof of stake problem. So there's actually 2 types of Casper implementation that have been outlined. The first is called FFG, or Friendly Finality Gadget, and the second is called CBC, or Correct by Construction. The first being proposed by Vitalik himself, and the second by a researcher called Vlad Zamfir. Vitalik's proposal for Casper, which is FFG, is essentially a proof of work, proof of stake hybrid solution. So it's not a purely proof of stake play. And this is kind of the first stage of Casper in that it's meant to wean people away from proof of work mining. Its acronym stands for Friendly Finality Gadget because while there's still proof of work mining going on for every block, every 50 blocks there's a proof of stake voting quorum that basically writes in a checkpoint for history. So FFG still has just regular proof of work, but every 50 blocks there's a proof of stake voting mechanism. And when they write this checkpoint, they're basically voting on something which is finality, i.e. something that is a historical representation of history that can't be changed. This kind of hybrid middle ground that we'll have for a little while in Ethereum is already running on a testnet, and I anticipate that we might actually see it come in on the mainnet later in 2018 as part of the Constantinople fork. I believe Constantinople is scheduled for somewhere around summer in the US or maybe a little bit later. If FFG just isn't ready by then and we don't see it in Constantinople, it'll likely get pushed out to the Serenity fork, which we don't currently really have a timeline on. I'd imagine it's very late 2018, if not early 2019. But again, FFG is just that initial phase to try and wean people and move people away from proof of work mining as a reliance reliance for consensus. The second and full approach being researched is CBC, or correct by construction. But this is still fairly deep in the research stage and is far from really being implemented in a workable way. It has a long way to go because CBC isn't just simply layering on proof of stake, it really kind of rethinks the whole way the consensus protocol operates. As such, I don't think we'll see it in 2018, probably 2019 if that. There is a chance that if FFG gets rolled out successfully, they could tweak the parameters of that and just keep iterating on the FFG model until the CBC approach is really nailed. Because CBC essentially changes the whole way consensus works in the protocol, it's not a change that they want to implement lightly, and so I don't think we're just going to see it rolled out on a whim or quickly. Casper's implementation of proof of stake is just like other proof of stake consensus protocols in that it does require 2/3 of the validators to agree to come to consensus. To avoid what's being dubbed a 33% attack though, Casper introduces essentially a deposit that people that are staking have to put down, and if they act badly, then they lose that deposit entirely. Because of this, there's a pretty strong financial disincentive for anybody to become a bad actor. But because of this security deposit being required in order to mitigate that attack, I do anticipate that it'll cost quite a lot to be a proof of stake validator on an FFG system early on. We're talking probably hundreds if not 1,000 Ethereum just to become a staker. I totally understand that because the incentives need to be aligned. It needs to be really expensive to try and attack the network, but it's going to be really interesting to see how many people actually use proof of stake and want to become a validator. In addition to laying down that money, proof of stake validators always have to be connected to the network as well, so it'll be interesting just to see the adoption of that. It's really important to note that Casper and proof of stake isn't being positioned as a scaling initiative. It's really just a promise they've made since the very beginning and something they've been saying they wanted to do to get rid of wasteful proof of work mining. There are some implications in the way that it can make scaling easier in the future because you're not relying on miners, which can often become centralized, but I feel like there's this common misconception that Casper is somehow going to equal magic Ethereum scaling, and that's simply not the case. So just wrapping up Casper and proof of stake, keep an eye out for the hybrid implementation in mid to late 2018, and the full implementation CBC, in my opinion, will probably come in 2019, if not later. But speaking of scalability, let's move on and dive into that. I've talked about this a fair bit on this channel, but ultimately there is no real simple silver bullet solution to scaling. Historically, when people have tried to scale these decentralized solutions, they've always introduced some point of centralization as a compromise. So you can look at something like super or master nodes or delegated proof of stake. It's all historically resulted in delegating or giving the responsibility and voting power back to a smaller group of people so it can scale more. So that's been a big point of contention and a hard problem to solve for everybody in this space, is how do you scale this stuff without just making it centralized again? And some people will say there's a threshold where there's acceptable centralization, like something like delegated proof of stake. But others, and I think this is the way that Ethereum and Vitalik think, that no, we don't want to have trusted individuals or entities out there. We want to maintain a decentralized network, but try and achieve scaling through smart technologies and new solutions. More recently, people have moved to a narrative where second layer solutions are going to be the thing that helps us scale. These second layer protocols are things like Plasma for state channels, which I'll have to do a video on in the future. It's been asked for a lot. Or something like the Lightning Network for payment channels, or Raiden, which does that on Ethereum. These are great innovative solutions. I think there's two problems with them. First, I think the use cases are limited because there's a certain type of payment relationship that has to exist in these second layer protocols. But outside of this, all of these second layer protocols still rely on the main chain for finality. So if you want to close out a payment channel and move your Bitcoin to someone else in Bitcoin, you still have to do that on the main chain. You're reliant on that main chain and its scalability and its costs. The good news with second layer solutions like Plasma and Raiden and all of these technologies is that they aren't really pegged to the Ethereum roadmap, so they can release at their own leisure. There's a lot of work being done on things like Plasma. I don't think we'll see more than an alpha implementation of that in 2018 because it's such a new cutting edge technology. We'll probably see something that's actually working on mainnet sometime in 2019. Just to be clear, I'm sure that people will experiment with stuff on mainnet in 2018, but I don't think it'll be production ready or easily accessible to non-developer users. But again, that doesn't get at the root of the problem. How do we solve scaling on the main chain? And something called sharding is Vitalik's current proposal for how we do that. Essentially what sharding does is it breaks the network into hundreds if not thousands of mini blockchains, and they're all independent. But the cool thing about these blockchains is that they inherit the same security model and consensus, so you're not having to worry about independent consensus on every single mini blockchain. These sub-blockchains can scale better because they exist for a specific purpose, and you're not trying to do thousands and thousands of different things on the one main chain like we're currently doing with Ethereum smart contracts. Other people have already thought about this kind of mini blockchain proposal and essentially having a network of these blockchains all participating in the same consensus. I've talked about some of these before in my cross-chain protocols video, which I recommend you go and watch, but some examples are Polkadot or the Cosmos network. But Vitalik wants to implement this natively in Ethereum, and I recommend you go and watch this video from the Beyond Block conference in Taipei, where he basically outlined his proposal. This is all very new and a 3 to 5 year plan that Vitalik is laying out here. So I don't think we'll even see an alpha implementation of it in 2018. We'll probably see more written specs and research into the idea of sharding, but I don't think we'll see an implementation that anybody can touch until sometime in 2019. As for what fork that'll eventually end up in, who knows? It'll be sometime far in the future, probably post the Serenity fork. So that's consensus and scaling. I think there's some cutting edge, cool technology that's going to solve these problems, but it's still a little ways out. I think the first we'll see is Casper FFG sometime in 2018, mid to late 2018 most likely. But in addition to consensus and scalability, there are some other concerns that people had, and people are working on cool solutions to those. The first I want to bring up is privacy, and Ethereum operates a lot like Bitcoin today in that everything is open and transparent and you can see what everybody else is doing. Some people don't like this, and this is why they use coins such as Zcash or Monero. Go and watch my privacy coin video if you haven't already. The good news for privacy on Ethereum is that most of the legwork has actually been done. There was a hard fork back in 2017 which introduced ZK snarks, so you can use that in smart contracts. ZK snarks, or zero knowledge proofs, are a technology that are used in Zcash to implement its privacy layer. And so all the fundamentals are actually already in Ethereum. Somebody just has to start writing smart contracts which leverage this in a smart way. And I haven't really seen an implementation of a token or anything that's utilizing this technology to its fullest just yet. I would anticipate in 2018 we're going to see some people start leveraging the fact that ZK snarks can be used in smart contracts, and we'll see some more privacy focused initiatives on top of Ethereum, but this will be second layer. It won't be built into Ethereum natively. The second concern that a lot of people have had is just security concerns around Ethereum smart contracts. Due to bugs in smart contract code in 2017, we saw hundreds of millions of dollars be stolen by exploiters. One of the most notable examples of this was the Parity wallet hack that happened, where everybody that was using the out-of-the-box multi-sig wallet for Parity basically lost their money. This included a lot of those ICOs who raised millions and millions of dollars, so it was a lot of angry people. The good news is that there are several initiatives focusing on how we solve that. First, there is actually an attempt to bring a better programming language to smart contracts. Right now, the de facto language for writing Ethereum smart contracts is something called Solidity. And while it's relatively easy for new developers to pick up, it leaves a lot of room for these developers to make mistakes, which makes their smart contracts vulnerable. There's a new smart contract language being developed called Viper, which is an alternative to Solidity, and it has a lot more security features, limiting down the methods you can actually access, basically making it harder for developers to unknowingly include exploits in their code. It's actually in alpha right now, and you can go and use it. There just doesn't seem to be a lot of people using it right now, but it is being actively developed. And the second approach to smart contract security, and this is kind of the holy grail, is something called formal verification. I've spoken about formal verification in the past in my What is a Smart Contract video when I was talking about Tezos. They're doing something similar with formally verifiable smart contracts and code. To be formally verifiable means that code can essentially be proven mathematically to do what it says on the box. So without having to run that code yourself and hunt for exploits, basically you can prove mathematically that the code just does what it says. To use formal verification though, you usually have to adhere to a very strict syntax in the way you write your smart contracts, which can be good because it encourages best practices, but you also often have to use a separate coding language altogether that is formally verifiable itself. There's a lot of research going into this, but it is cutting edge, so I don't expect we're going to see a lot of movement in this in 2018, but it's something to keep an eye on, and it's the way I think that all smart contracts and all code in the future is going to be written as well, so that you can verify that something does what it says it does without having to go hunt for bugs. Again, the cool thing about the two things that I've just mentioned is that they can be implemented completely independently of the Ethereum roadmap and any changes to the Ethereum protocol itself. So if you combine all the things I've talked about today, that's actually quite a lot of movement happening on the Ethereum front. So that's my roundup of the Ethereum roadmap, what's happening with the protocol itself and the core team, but also with the secondary layer stuff and the tooling around it. I think 2017 really set Ethereum up so that all the eyes are on its development, and now it's really up to the development community behind Ethereum to basically take it forward and prove that it can scale in a secure way. So what do you think? Does the future of Ethereum look bright? Let me know in the comments. And also let me know if there was anything that I've missed that's on the roadmap that you're really excited about. If you found this video useful, please slam that like button. It really helps out. And like I said earlier, hit the subscribe button so you get weekly updates when I post these videos, and also when I do my Sunday live stream. If you like this content and you want to support the creation of more videos just like this one, jump over to patreon.com/Jackson, and you can support these videos and get access to all sorts of exclusive perks like early access to videos, exclusive Patreon only hangouts, and more. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful. Until next time, I'll see you later.